Hi everyone, and welcome to the second in our webinar series, Adults Born Preterm, the Honesty Sessions. I'm Lauren, I'm an adult born preterm. I was born at 26 weeks gestation and weighing 430 grams. I'm also co-founder of the Adult Preemie Advocacy Network, CIC, which aims to raise awareness of the long-term impacts of prematurity across the life course. I am delighted to welcome Mandy Daly, who is speaking to me today. Mandy is the parent of a recently turned adult born preterm and is also the founder of the Irish Neonatal Health Alliance. Thank you so much for joining me, Mandy.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here, Lauren.
No problem. So if I could start with just asking about your experiences as a mum and your daughter Amelia's experience of your journey following NICU.
Okay. So after our 3 months in NICU, my daughter, who was born at the end of 25 weeks, we were told initially when we were taking Amelia home to treat her as a normal child and that by the age of 2, she would have caught up with her peers. And I have to say, that was one of the carrots that probably kept me going for the first 2 years of her life. I didn't have any other children. It was my first experience of having a child, but it was very different from what I had thought. So things like she never slept, she never ate, she was always agitated, and there was nobody to turn to. It did transpire that she would find it very difficult to go to sleep at night. She'd wake after a few hours screaming. Took me quite a number of months to reconcile what was actually going on. We knew she had BPD coming home, which is bronchopulmonary dysplasia. We had no idea what that was. It was a lung condition. Wasn't really explained to us in its entirety. So it turns out that children with BPD are affected by the position that they sleep in. So Amelia found it really difficult to sleep in that safe positioning of on her back. When she did sleep, it started to hurt her lungs. It became very difficult to breathe. She would wake up screaming. I would intervene, and we would spend the entire night sitting upright with Amelia sitting in front of me, and she would eventually nod off to sleep in an upright position. Something it took me 9 or 10 months to discover. So that's just one little tiny example of going home with the child, being told, treat her as normal, and then slowly discovering that these children have different ways of navigating the world. If she hadn't slept because she would have really bad broken sleep, she wouldn't have enough energy to feed the next day. And feeding was a huge issue because Amelia had an oral aversion, again, something I'd never heard of, something that was really evolving probably in the NICU. So she would have been intubated for quite a while. Then she had CPAP for quite a long time. So a lot of her oral experiences were very negative. So by the time I got her home, I had no idea why she wouldn't feed. It was very distressing for her. It was very distressing for me. She didn't have the energy to feed. So that's that cycle of not having enough sleep, not having the energy to feed, being very cranky all day, not gaining weight became a bit of a cycle because literally every day was the same. It was like Groundhog Day. There was no sleep, there was no feeding. What we don't realize with these kids, I think, is their brain is still developing. And it develops differently in preterm babies because they're exposed to the external world a lot earlier than our term infants. And as such, we don't build that into how we interact with them. So for her, she needed lots of sleep for her brain to grow. She wasn't getting that sleep because of her BPD and her positioning. Then she wasn't growing because A, she had no energy to feed. And it was like one of those sort of spiraling out of control situations. And those early days were really hard. There was very little time for us. Navigating her in the community was very challenging. We did find a lot of our community-based and healthcare professionals weren't that familiar with the preterm community. And the minute you would open the conversation of, I have a preterm baby born at the end of 25 weeks, you wouldn't get to the next sentence and they would go, you might be better off going to the local hospital here. And that, again, we were 2 hours away. So it was very difficult to have any support in the community for us as a family, but also for our child who had a lot of health issues. She had constant chest infections. She was cycling through antibiotic. But because of an oral aversion, she couldn't take oral medications. You couldn't get her to take anything via her mouth. She would end up in hospital anyway for IV drugs. And that is distressing because you're told to protect these children during the winter months. You don't want them exposed to RSV. Then you're being told by a community healthcare professional you have to go to an A&E department. And that went on for lots of years. Getting her to eat solid foods was incredibly challenging, still is. We're now at a point where she has ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. So she's got a very limited diet. Her diet textures are very limited. She chooses what she gets to eat. With children who have oral aversion, they like consistency. And a lot of our food, I guess, that comes out of the ground, even the shape of the potato, the how it looks, how it tastes can be different. But a piece of processed pasta will always be a piece of processed pasta, no matter who makes it, how you cook it. And these are some of the things we had to navigate when Amelia was very small. I'd never heard of ARFID. I knew she had issues with eating. I didn't know how to hook it, what to call it. Neither did the healthcare community. She had lots of emerging sensory issues. So we all think we have 5 senses. We actually have 8. I discovered that as soon as I realized Amelia had sensory processing issues across all 8 of her senses. So we're not even talking just like, vision, sound, touch, smell. We're also talking interoception. So being able to navigate, when am I hungry? When do I need to use the bathroom? Am I tired? She still struggles with that. As an adult, we're getting a little bit better, I think, of raising public awareness about interoception, but it's still very much in its infancy in terms of the general public has no idea what it is. So when you're also trying to translate that into a school environment, you're often met with a lot of very confused faces, people who are going to be taking care of your child in a classroom setting who don't necessarily have the adequate skill set. And I think therein lies a lot of problems for parents navigating school-going years. You're explaining that your child is preterm. The general perception is that child is going to be small, and that's about it. And it's so much more than that. It is preterm birth is the gift that keeps on giving, I often say, because I don't know, does it ever come to an end? And the disappointment on the teacher's faces when this child comes to their classroom who they know is going to be preterm, and she turns out to be the tallest girl in the class, because that's what they had thought. They thought she was going to be this little minuscule thing rocking up. She wasn't. But all of her issues are all silent and invisible. So things like dyspraxia, not being able to participate fully in physical education, and having the school environment then penalize you on your reports because you didn't meet the target. You're being judged against your peers. And that happened consistently throughout primary school. Likewise, a lot of the sensory issues during school were very difficult. So explaining that if children eat oranges in the vicinity of my daughter, she may throw up. People have never heard of that. And you get a phone call to say your kid's been sick in school. And well, did somebody have an orange? Because she's not actually sick. She's just had a trigger. That's it. Things like she has a foot that it requires special shoes. It's a different shape. She's lost a lot of her nails on her toes are misshapen. She would get penalized in school because she didn't have her school shoes on, despite the number of conversations you have with the school about she's a preterm baby, these are issues, and these are the accommodations she needs. So for a lot of that time, I guess we had to navigate being her voice. Same thing in secondary school. You morph to secondary school and you try having the same conversations again. But it's a case of, but she was preterm and she's outgrown that. And that is the biggest lie, I think, that has been sold to a lot of us as parents. I think I probably got to age 3 or 4 and thought, she's never hitting that 2-year mark. She's actually never going to catch up with those peers. But once I realized that, I think then it actually empowered me as a parent to go, okay, this is our lot now, and we're going to have to navigate this as a family, and we're going to have to change the narrative around this conversation because age 2 is well gone, and we haven't got the dose. We haven't caught up with our peers yet. And we're still there in secondary school. We're still having those challenges of we learn differently. So, not every child, whether they're term or preterm, has the same learning journey. But in our case, it involves a lot of jumping around and a lot of movement breaks. And understanding how your child learns is a real empowering moment because then you can actually help their tutors in the school environment help them. Now, that doesn't mean the school environment that you've chosen is a suitable school environment. You may, as in our case, have to cycle through a number of options before you find some environment that suits them. But I think it's really important that we give our preterm infants the best possibility that, that they can reach that potential. And I think we've just about found it now, but it's taken us a good number of years to do so. Um, and finding, having to explain to the local doctor why they get a chest infection very often, why they can't take a particular antibiotic because it's banana flavored, because for sensory issues, they can't take banana flavor or strawberry or orange or anything fruit. And I find myself recently having conversations with the pharmaceutical industries asking why are not antibiotics chocolate flavored? Because funny enough, every preterm baby with an oral version that I've met so far doesn't have a problem with chocolate. Consistent. So, there are so many hidden challenges en route. We're still fighting them. Like Amelia perceives pain differently to other children. Does it go back to how she was cared for in the NICU? Possibly, because her pain perceptors, they're they're kind of reversed. So she interprets light pain as really, really painful, but then she has no ability to interpret deep pain. Kind of difficult when you've got a broken leg and you're not able to convey that. So again, you're having those conversations with healthcare professionals who've never met somebody like this, and they're looking at you as a parent thinking, you've got to be making this up. Where's the proof? The proof is come live with me for a week. A lot of our preterm babies, because they spend a lot of time being sick, constantly being out of school, you're then having conversations with schools explaining, well, the winter season is a bad season for our children. They have underlying health conditions, but there's still this blanket rule of, certainly where I live, if your child is out of school for 21 days, you're reported to the government because your child has missed school, even though this kid has a very genuine reason for being out of school. There's a lot of health anxiety I see in a lot of our teenage preterm children, because they're sick so much. And as parents, I know as a parent, I have probably overcompensated. I have overprotected. I have probably read too much into lots of stuff that's been going on. I have tried to be a normal parent, but it's very much a not normal setting. And I think sometimes as a parent, you do feel you're constantly questioning, did I make the right decision? Should I have pursued something earlier on? And there's no book, there's no template that said this is how you navigate preterm birth after NICU. And I think very much the work that we do in the INHA is very much based on what the stories and family, what they tell us. The families say, this is my experience, and I just don't want somebody else to experience it. How can we turn my experience into something that is supportive of families going into the future? And I look into the future and think, what does the future hold? Because we know that the evidence is suggesting that the health of our preterm community is compromised at a much earlier age than we would expect for term babies. And they have nothing. There is nobody out there hearing that conversation. There's nobody drafting health policy. There's nobody amending how the health services are delivered to accommodate an enormous cohort of people who've been born preterm who are going to be presenting at a much earlier age than the healthcare system is prepared for and even understands. And there's nobody taking that mantle on board. There's nobody saying, yes, we now need to change how we look at this cohort into the future. We need to learn much more. What we have a lot of is anecdotal stories, lived experiences from families who are telling us, this is my life. How can we take this and change it into something that's more positive for other families? And we're not gathering that data quickly enough, in my estimation, and we're not reacting to what we're seeing quickly enough. And I suppose that for me is a very it's upsetting because I feel like I've been doing this work for 18 years and I've been banging the same drum, but there are more people banging that same drum, which is it fills me with joy that that I'm not the only one. And I think for me, that's always a very supportive thing, that there are others out there navigating this journey. Is how do we bring them all together under one umbrella and work collectively to be heard? So I suppose that's a very quick synopsis of our journey. Happy to keep talking, but if you have any questions, please feel free.
So I'm curious. So I have a really good relationship with my mum, and fundamentally I put that down to her being honest with me over the years about my prematurity and my journey. And not that she had all the answers, but just acknowledging that that third trimester was so crucial, and just trying to relate to the experiences I was going through. So how have you developed that connection and communication with your daughter? And do we think perhaps we need to talk about this a little bit more openly and the information that we're being given to support that process?
I agree, Lauren. I think as parents, we do our best to protect our children and we want to protect them. And when they are born preterm and you bring them home, you just want life to be normal because up to that point of discharge, nothing has been normal. And your biggest dream is for things to go swimmingly. And as you well know, that isn't often the case. And for a certain period of time, we try and protect them, but they're journeying it with us. And how on earth can we keep it from them? And I think by journeying together and having those age appropriate conversations, we're actually empowering them to find their own voice and to understand who they are. There's nobody knows you better than your mum, probably knows you better than you do yourself. And I would feel the same. I feel there are things about my daughter that I probably know better, but it's not my journey, it's our journey. And I think if we don't encourage them to speak up and be able to speak on their behalf, but be there for them in those early days while they're finding that pathway, we're doing them a disservice because they ultimately do have to go into the world themselves and advocate on their own behalf. And also to understand why your brain is the way it is, why you do things the way you do things. I think that's actually a huge self-empowerment because if I understand how my brain is wired and why I need to run around to regulate myself before I can do my homework at night, at least then I understand me. I'm not hearing an adult tell me you need to run around because you can't do your homework. I don't understand that process. And I think it's very important that as families, we don't hide the fact that our children are premature. I often talk to families before they go to school and advocate and say it's a good idea to tell the school about your child's birth journey because it's going to be very relevant whether you like it or not. There may be issues that come up, and if the school is in the dark, they may not fully understand how to interact with your child. And it is incredible the number of families who come back to me and say, we don't tell anything, we don't talk about preterm birth, we've just gotten on with it. But I think then they're missing an opportunity. They're missing an opportunity to pick up on those subtle differences that may require intervention or that may require a different approach by saying nothing. I think it's not fair. It's your journey and it's your life. And I often feel, why would I hold anything back? I can do it in an age appropriate manner and I can obviously accompany the child up to a certain point. But then there's a point where they take responsibility for themselves and it's their story, it's their journey, and it's their life. But it's our job to get them to that point where they're confident in themselves to continue that conversation on their own behalf.
Absolutely, because certainly within the adult community, there is a sense that if these things aren't addressed early on, it can flow through and impact your adult life, such as employment, further education, and just the choices that you are able to make.
Agreed. I totally agree with you. I mean, I see so many adult ex-preemies who I feel had their early childhood journey been slightly different, had their family been better supported, had they been better supported by their healthcare community, by their education community, their, as you say, their choices, their options would have been different. They wouldn't find themselves where they are now. They might find themselves in a better place in terms of advocating on their own behalf in terms of their health, whether it's deteriorating or not. Often I see adults in adulthood who are born expertly discovering things 20, 25 years later after the event when something could have been positively done and an intervention might have made it a different outcome. I recently had a medical student that I teach medical students, and one of my students in my class was born preterm. I didn't realize it. I was talking about the long-term effects of preterm birth. And he approached me afterwards. And it was the first time in his 23 years, he knew he was preterm, but it was the first time in his 23 years that he'd seen the whole, I'm going to say, the map of the potential things that may go wrong into adulthood presented before him. And he was absolutely shocked because he didn't realize there was so much. But in that very short lecture, I had answered so many questions he'd had about himself that he had nobody to ask. And that story will stick with me forever because I am so conscious now that there are still those out there for whom this conversation hasn't happened. And I felt utterly responsible for minding him afterwards and walking through his journey with him so he fully understood what my class had been about. But it was a revelation moment for him. It now gave him the power back to understand himself and advocate on his own behalf. So power conversations cannot be underestimated at all.
Absolutely. Do you think that we are doing enough as families, but also incorporating professionals like healthcare, education, allied professionals into raising awareness outside of NICU and across the life course?
In one word, no. I think a lot of the awareness that is being raised is still about prior to getting pregnant, NICU life, and then it really falls off a cliff after discharge. So kind of age 2, we do a little bit, and then after that, you're really left to your own devices. And there isn't enough collaborative work happening in that space. And that is where I feel the most collaboration needs to happen because in the NICU, it's a very contained environment. There's a certain number of healthcare professionals and families. But when we go into the real world, we have the local doctor, we've got the pharmacist, we have the teacher, we have future employers of ex-preterm babies, all of whom I believe need to have a certain level of awareness about this cohort because there's so many of them and we just don't do anything. We've had little attempts. So like I've been working on a prenate hub, which is like a hub for those who possibly will interact with ex-preterm infants as they grow up, just to give people a very quick snapshot of what life may be like. It's not enough, absolutely not enough. And I think we do need to sort of step back and look at this community and go, what supports do they need in the community? And how do we then empower those agencies who are delivering those supports to understand better and be better at developing policy and awareness campaigns so that we all are, I guess, on a level playing field? That is not happening. As I said, it's happening in little, and you have people like me who will rant and rave in school and who will do so to the local GP, who at this point now I feel are just about upskilled, but it's taken 18 years to do so. But the school like my daughter has gone to, like they now bring me in and they get me to talk to their children in the school about preterm birth. So I get a chance to talk to 17-year-olds who, some of them are going to have babies, some of them are going to have preterm babies. It's an opportunity to give them that little bit of information before the event. And hopefully that will help them navigate a journey in a better way later on. So we need to do that better. We need to be doing it in a more widespread fashion and a more strategic fashion so that by the time you as an ex-preterm infant enter an employment situation, don't have to start explaining yourself all over again. And you've spent the last 20 years doing so in different settings. You're having the same conversation. It's like you've had a little calling card and hand it over and go, this explains who I am. At this point, I feel I could write that calling card or a little QR code that people could scan, So we do need to be doing a lot better. How do you manage that? That involves a very large scale conversation. It really does. And it involves very high level looking at those areas that are most important: education, employment, community health, and bringing those parties together and saying, what can we do as a collective to do better for this community? I mean, ultimately, anything we do to improve outcomes is a cost saving in my estimation, because you're improving somebody's quality of life and their ability to give back to society. That's unquantifiable.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mandy. I think that's a fantastic point to end on. So
No
if I
problem.
may, I'm just going to share a few slides just to give a little update on the future webinars coming up. Thank you so much for joining me and Mandy in our conversation of adult born preterm and parent. I would really like to continue this conversation because I think it's a dynamic that we don't see enough of within our community. If you have any questions or comments, as this is a pre-recorded webinar, our details are available for you on the screen now. A huge thank you to Vicky, Kat and all the team at 99 NICU for helping me with this series and supporting its promotion. And finally, please join us for the next webinar in our series, Preterm Birth History Matters to Both of Us, How to Foster Communication Between Clinicians and Patients. Thank you so much again, Mandy. I really appreciate your time.
No problem, Lauren. Thank you so much.
Thank you.